Hi there, Linda Behrens here. I just want to share with you some thoughts that I've been having recently about superpowers. And over the last year or so, I've been working with a team, not as a client, but as a partner. And one of the partners talked about another team member as having superpowers. And I realized that, gee, it's an important thing. You know, there's a lot of talk about superheroes, and in some ways we all can be superheroes. And it's the superpowers that we have that enable us to really do that heroic kind of thing. And of course, too much of a good thing is probably not the way we want to go with expressing those superpowers. One of the things I learned as that happened is that I started to see the people on this team as in light of their superpowers. And because I have multiple frameworks for understanding their individual differences and what their talents are, it was very enlightening to see how much more I appreciated those people when I thought about them as superpowers. And then when I expressed that they had a superpower, they were like, oh, wow, yeah, I do. How do you know that? So the thing is, how do you know what your superpowers are? So I want to share with you a few ideas about that, and it helps to have a framework for naming some of them. It's certainly not going to get all of them, but it will get some of them. And they're the most powerful ones because they meet our core psychological needs. They're part of who we are and why we came into this world in a way. So just a few thoughts about superpowers. So what are your core superpowers? Well, there are many ways to look at them. So we're just going to take a look at one particular lens of looking at superpowers. But before we do that, let's talk about superpowers in general and where do they come from? Well, first of all, we have to understand the whole self. There is what we call this innate core self. It's that aspect of ourself that we're born with. Now, not everything that we are is innate. But the template is there where we're predisposed to develop certain qualities, certain characteristics. And as we grow and develop, we're attracted to doing those things. So therefore, we usually develop a fair amount of skill in them. And so that we call our innate core self. And then we come into this world in a situation where we have to behave a certain way. So that's our current behavior, and we call that our contextual self. That's who we are in a particular situation, and it may be in sync with this innate core self, or it may possibly not be in sync with it. So this contextual self is an aspect of who we are, and it's where we have the most flexibility. So an important aspect to be aware of, it's that where we adapt to the situation that we're in and the context that we're in. And then there is this aspect of ourself where we adapt to the pressures put on us by the context, and we adapt to those things and perhaps develop some skills with them. And also in this innate core self, there's a push to grow. So whatever way it is, we're growing and developing. And so we call this the developed self. Now, I like to say that this developed self is who you really are. And you may have some superpowers that come out of this developed self because you've practiced them. So if I ask you to sign your name, for example, with your left hand, you probably would do that, right? And so that we call use. It's what you're doing. You're able to do it, you do it, and that comes from the outside. You're just doing it. Doesn't matter where it comes from. Then if I ask you, did you have some skill when you signed your name with your left hand? You would say, yes. And how did you get that skill? Well, you probably had to practice it. Or with your right hand, if you had some skill with that. So we develop over time with developed skill by using a capacity that we have. So skill only comes with practice and use. So we call that nurture. And then we have preference, meaning that we're predisposed to do things a certain way, and that we call nature. You could have some talents that are part of your nature and not develop them. You wouldn't be skilled in them necessarily. So this whole idea of skill and talent it's different. Skill is different from talent. Skill comes from use. Talent comes from a predisposition, and you may need to practice those things. You may have a degree of excellence with it. And in that degree of excellence, that's our superpowers. So just keeping this in mind, that we have some superpowers that are related to our natural predispositions, and they become superpowers by being practiced. And they may not be consciously being developed, but they are there and to be developed. So how are we going to find out what those superpowers are? Well, we use multiple lenses, and there are several multiple lenses. There's the interaction styles, which is how we do what we do. Cognitive dynamics, which is how we think about things. And then there are 16 type patterns, which have a theme. And each of these has a superpower, but the one I'm going to talk with you about today is the Essential Motivators pattern. This lens gives us some idea of some superpowers that we have that help meet our core needs and values. And these core psychological needs and values are so important to us that we will go to great lengths to get them met. So it's a predisposition we have to engage in those kinds of activities. Now, all of these will give us some ideas about our superpowers, but today we're going to focus on essential motivators. Just a hint of that, short hint. So the essential motivator pattern, first we look at the pattern of behavior to tell us how is it configured. And so there, in essential motivators, also known as temperament, by the way, has a long history over 25 centuries. And David Kersey made temperament theory rather well known, with what then, as I started to look at it after I studied with him, started calling it essential motivators, because it is what deeply motivates us. And it's getting those needs are met so important that we'll go to great lengths to get them met, even have particular stress responses to try to get them met. Now, related to those core needs are some core values, and they're almost like a whole package. And then related to that are talents, and these talents are the gifts we're given to scratch the itch that the core needs present. And then we have behaviors. So the behaviors are a little more removed from the core needs, but the talents are intimately tied to our core needs. And these talents then have the potential, with some practice and opportunity to express, to be a very important part of our superpowers. So just not going over the whole temperament pattern or the whole essential motivator pattern, but here are the 4 superpowers that come from this lens, this way of looking at who we are. One of them is improvising. Improvising meets our core needs with the freedom to act now and to make an impact. Reading the situation with tactical talent means reading the situation and seeing what actions need to be taken. Doing tactical planning, doing tactical prioritizing. In some ways, strategizing around those tactics. So, sort of in a longer term view than just what's right here, right now. So tactics are noticing what's going on right now and what action needs to be taken. And there are people who have incredible superpowers with this tactical intelligence, and they tend to improvise, to make do with what's there, to bring in to solutions, to solve problems on the fly very often. Now, another superpower is what I call stabilizing. And stabilizing meets our core needs for responsibility and duty and to make a contribution. And the talent that it brings that this superpower brings is logistics. Now, logistics is about getting the right things in the right place, making all of the arrangements, making sure things go right and don't go wrong. It can be logistical planning as well, which is about making the arrangements for the actions that need to take place and all of the things that have to be taken care of for something to be successful and to bring stability to it. And that, when we're engaged in that, it gives us a sense, if this is your superpower, it gives you a sense of being responsible, and that you actually make a contribution, and that the world will go on, which is part of that stabilizing core need. Fear rising as a superpower isn't about just making up theories, but it's really getting to the deep root of how things work. Not in a tactical or logistical sense, but and not in a theoretical as opposed to real sense, but in a sense of really having the fundamentals of understanding. So the core need that theorizing helps us get met, if this is your style, your superpower, is to have the knowledge and competence to do things really well and to have mastery. And the talent is what we call strategy. Now, strategy is one of those words that's used in a lot of different ways. And it has some traditional things in business, but it has to do in this sense of thinking of very long-term implications for things that other people don't see, and things that may not be evident in tangible reality, but that is coming down the pike sometime in the future. Far range. And a friend of mine who has this as a talent says that his superpower is he thinks of things, solutions to problems sometimes that haven't been identified yet. Okay, so that's the theorizing. And then catalyzing meets our core needs for meaning and significance and having a sense of unique identity. Because when you catalyze something, you're entering into an interaction like in chemistry where you're making it move and being a catalyst for it to become what it's supposed to be doing without getting caught up in it. So it's like an accelerator in a way. And the talent that goes with catalyzing is what we call diplomacy. Now, it's not like being a diplomat, but it's about having this taking into account how people are going to respond, to be able to say things so that people respond to them, and to know what's going on with people, to recognize some of the deep important values and beliefs that people are standing for. So we have 4 potential superpowers that, if they are developed, can be very, very powerful. And it's just part of the picture, and it can help us understand what really motivates us and how we can bring our greatest gifts to the world if we start to recognize and give space for those talents, those superpowers to exist and to actually own them and practice them. So I hope that this has been helpful for you to think about having a map for superpowers and kind of start to examine some of your own behavior, your own tendencies, and kind of what you've always done. There's many resources out there on this model. Understanding Yourselves and Others, An Introduction to the 4 Temperaments is a workbook we created that has packed with information. And then, of course, if you are wanting to use this professionally, I recommend you join us in the Essential Motivators certification program that starts next month. So those are just some of the resources, and there are several others that you can find on the web to understand better each of these 4 patterns. Thank you for joining me and spending this little bit of time with me. to talk a little bit about superpowers. You'll be hearing more about us, about superpowers, core superpowers, which are the superpowers that are at the core of our personality, as the year unfolds and we start to share more of these. So thank you.